I think I want to start this evening's podcast with something very unusual for this particular podcast. You know my feelings about religion in general. And you also know that I very frequently lacerate the Christian church in this country, whether it be Protestant or Catholic. And I think my reasons for that laceration, my reasons are valid. And apparently some of you agree, some of you disagree, but I understand that. But I've also told you that my early life was with my grandmother was in a Baptist church. And I finally got away from that and got into Methodist church when I was a young teenager and stayed with it until I was about 17 when I left home and hit the road. But the Methodist church kind of became, for a time being, that was my spiritual home. Not that I believed what they were telling me. I did believe in a supreme being. I believed in the stories that I was exposed to in the Bible. For the most part, I had a hard time with Noah or Jonah, or some of the bullshit that shows up. And being a teenage boy, I found it very interesting, the Song of Solomon, where he talks about his lover's breasts being like doves or something. Hell, I don't remember. But I just remember at the time when I was a young teenage boy, of course. Ooh, God, read me some more of that. But the Methodist Church, I sang in the choir when I was a teenager. I wound up as president of the youth fellowship, Methodist Youth Fellowship in our church. So I had quite a background in the Methodist brand of Protestantism, to the extent that when I was 16, the preacher called me to his office and said that he and the board of deacons of the church would like to send me to seminary, and they would pay for my college education, provided that I came out with the Doctor of Divinity or whatever the degree is that gives you the background to become a Protestant preacher or pastor or minister, whatever. And I remember sitting there in his office thinking, wow, I'm being offered this? But I finally said to Reverend Jones, that was his name. He had a very famous name. John Paul Jones was his name. But I said to Reverend Jones, I'm sorry, it's a wonderful offer, but I don't believe some of the stuff that I'm hearing. And he was very understanding, given the fact that I just told him I didn't really believe his religion. So that was the end of that. And, I broke away from all church involvement the next year when I was 17, just walked away from all of it. But now I read this morning in the Charlotte Observer that the United Methodist Church delegates, there was a convention in Charlotte, they took a vote, and they decided to end their anti-L.G.B.T.Q. policies after having them in place for decades. Now, when I read this, I thought, well, okay. I mean, why was it in place for decades to begin with? I remember when I was in the church I was just telling you about in Toledo, Ohio, our organ player, a guy, was gay. The choir leader, a woman, was a lesbian. But it just wasn't, I mean, it was, I guess it was accepted as long as nobody talked about it. But anyway, the Methodist Church has now ended that longtime prohibition on same-sex marriages. That was some time ago. And according to the Charlotte Observer, a pastor who grew up in Charlotte said she was glad the vote happened in her hometown. And beyond that, Methodists have been involved in intense debates over this issue at past conferences. But there was a split in the church. If you remember, the conservative parishes left the Methodist denomination. They took their hymnals and harps and said, piss on you. We don't believe in all this Jesus stuff. We're out of here. However, delegates at the 11-day conference in Charlotte which just ended, I believe it just ended, they voted 692 to 51 to repeal the Methodist Church ban on L.G.B.T.Q. clergy and the prohibition against officiating at same-sex weddings. How about that? So I give them a big round of applause to the Methodist Church. 692 to 51. I mean, that is, I would say that's a bit overwhelming. There was no debate about this. The Reverend James Howard, who was senior pastor at the Myers Park United Methodist Church in Charlotte, and he was a delegate at the conference, he said this, quote, "It's something I've been working on for most of my adult life within the United Methodist Church, so I'm certainly happy. We want to keep our arms around everybody. We're better together. God wants all people to be together in church," end quote. Well, sure. Aside from the word God, I think any philosophy that stands for the betterment of human beings, that philosophy almost requires, by definition, open arms, so to speak, to use the minister's term here, to put their arms around each other and just say, hey, look, I don't care if you're black, white, gay, straight, Jew, Gentile, up, down, left, right. It doesn't make any difference. We are the same. We're human beings. So what is all the bullshit about? Well, this is where my active disrespect, and I might as well say it, disgust that I have for organized religion. There's only one religion that in my experience, and I grant you my experience has been limited, but there's only one religion that I find that is not this way, and that is Wicca. Ooh, you mean the witches? No, I mean Wicca, the religion. So anyway, delegates also voted to stop local church leaders from penalizing clergy or churches who choose or don't choose to host or officiate same-sex weddings. In other words, they're leaving that up to the various congregations. So the actions taken yesterday will remove text from the Methodist, it's called the Book of Discipline, how to run your church. And that book establishes laws and doctrine in the church. And up to, well, now I guess, it targeted, you like that word? Quote, self-avowed practicing homosexuals, end quote. The Book of Discipline said these were less than human beings. This is essentially what they were saying. And the Book of Discipline also had text saying, quote, the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, end quote. That will be removed also. But, this whole idea of homosexual, heterosexual, it's such a bullshit division. I mean, it really is. Please, just, you've got to, I know you probably already do, so I shouldn't say it this way, but you've got to accept that. We all have to accept that. I didn't when I was a kid. Oh my God, it's a typical male, young 12, 14, 15-year-old male who said all kinds of anti-black stuff, anti-gay stuff. It just tumbled out of my mouth like a waterfall. I mean, that's what I was taught. Consequently, that's what I believed. And it took a while to stop the bullshit on my part. But I did. I did. So anyway, back to this congregation that went on for 11 days. I think it ended yesterday or it ends this weekend. But the overwhelming result of the vote, because of that, the issues will be rolled into a consent calendar of normally non-controversial measures that are taken in a single vote to save time. They're just going to put it all together and say, okay, we're done with that horse shit. We're done with our anti-gay, anti-lesbian, anti-trans, We're done with it. We're done with the bullshit of saying the churches can't have same-sex marriages. If two people are in love and want to get married, why not do it in the church? I mean, if that's what the couple wants. I've always thought that church marriages are kind of bullshitty. I mean, they really are. If people want that, the romance of or the tradition of getting married in a religious institution, okay. But keep in mind that the church does not make the marriage legal. The state in which the marriage occurs makes it legal. As I've said before, that's why the closing words of an officiant who is conducting a marriage inside a church will say, "And now by the power vested in me by the state of Georgia, I pronounce you husband and wife." Even though, it's in a church. Now, of course, they only say that in Georgia. Don't be a smartass. I mean, in the various 50 states, the officiant, or however you pronounce it, the person conducting the vows, religious vows, and those religious vows are so ancient, but okay, some people want that tradition, fine. But it's always with the blessing and the permission of the state. It's very simple. And last week, the delegates, when this, by the way, the changes will take place immediately when this meeting concludes. I guess it concludes tomorrow, Friday. But last week, the delegates voted on what they call regionalization of the denomination of the United Methodist Church, and that would allow churches in other countries to make their own L.G.B.T.Q. policies. So, does that mean this is a halfway measure? Well, the Methodist Church in the United States has decided this is their new policy regarding lesbian, gay, trans, bisexual, whatever people. So it's up to the Methodist denominations in other countries to either follow suit or say no. It's up to them. Now, the guy I was quoting, the Reverend James Howell, who runs a church in Charlotte, he said yesterday that policy changes in the Methodist Church were long overdue. He said, quote, "The mood here is a lot of great hope and joy. It's not a progressive church or a conservative church. It's a church for everyone. And we're finally taking steps toward being sure that one group isn't singled out and not part of that effort. That's a good vote for us." End quote. To which I say, if I may, amen. What else can I say? I just thought I should lead tonight's podcast with something that is about church, but is not my usual gutting of some phony-ass minister or some, what do they call them now, prosperity gospel con artist, or, like the Reverend Hagee. What's his first name? William Hagee? That son of a bitch who has said many times, well, if people are hungry and they can't work, let them starve. That's not exactly what I would call Christian. But Hagee is a hustler. He's like a lot of these televangelists and people that run churches with these mega churches. They're nothing more than hustlers. They're con artists, just like this Jeffers in is it Dallas, Texas, has the biggest church in the universe or something. They're hustlers. They're con artists. They're grifters. They steal, and rather than use a gun to steal, they use the threat that your immortal soul is going to burn in hell. Nice, huh? Okay, that's all. So good on the Methodist Church. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. The Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.